Alrighty, in this video, we're going to go ahead and finalize our user's admin by creating our reset password links as well as our delete user button. So let's go ahead and start with reset password. The first step I'm going to do is I'm going to add the actual reset password button to our form. So going into our user's index, I'll add the reset password button. It'll point to an action, and that action hasn't been created yet. So let's just make sure our view works first, and then we'll make our action. So I'm going to add another button here on our actions for our user. And I have pointed over to action, reset password. I'm going to pass in a parameter of user.id. The content of this A tag will be a class glyph icon, so it'll be a glyph icon, and then it's going to have a glyph icon dash lock to it, and we'll say reset password. I'll also want to, well, let's just follow the convention I had with edit, and I'll make this lowercase. And then the A tag, I'll give it a class of button, so btn xs, and then let's do btn default, so that it's kind of a grayish button. Now let's see if that is going to display properly. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up my user's admin, refresh, and see what we get. Wait a year and a half. We now have a nice little reset password button right next to our edit button. Okay, so if we click on the reset password button, we'll get a 404. We've got a 404 because we haven't actually made the reset password action yet. So let's do that. Let's jump into our controllers, user's controller, and create reset password. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, above my private method, but below my edit method. And I'm going to say public AR for action result, reset password, int ID. Then I'm going to say var user equals database users find ID. And then I'm going to say if user is null, return redirect to action index. Then I'm going to go ahead and say return view, and I'm going to pass in a new users reset password view model that I haven't created yet, but I have an idea of what it's going to look like. I'm going to want my username, so user.username, and then actually that's it. That's really the only data that our reset password form needs to display to our user, our admin, is which user we're resetting the password for. So we can just pass in the username as a property. Let's go ahead and create the user's reset password view model. Although, I almost forgot, I am going to stub out my reset password int ID form, return view form, HTTP post. I am going to stub this out really fast again so I don't forget to actually implement our postback method. But now I'm going to go ahead and create our user's reset password view model. So I'm going to come up to view models and I'm going to create a new class and I'm going to call it users reset password. Then I'm going to give a public string a username. Note that I'm not going to add any data annotations to this property. I'm not going to add a required or a max length or a data type or a display name or anything because we're really just using this property as straight up data. We're not going to be posting back to this property. However, there's going to be something else interesting we need to add to our view model, and that is form data. Not data that we're going to fill in from the controller, but data that's going to be filled in by the model binder when we post back. So to do that, what we're going to need is we're going to need a public string password. And the password is going to be required. And it is going to have a data type of data type.password. And of course, I'm going to need to import system.componentModel.data annotations in order to have those attributes. But now that I've marked up my password as being required and having the data type of password, we can now use the editor for extension method to print out a nice little password field for our admin. So coming back to our user's controller, we see that all of our code now compiles, but let's go ahead and write our view first, and then we'll worry about implementing the reset password functionality. So over in users, I'm going to create a new Razor MVC view with layout, and I'm going to call it reset password to correspond to my action name. Now the model is going to be users reset password, and everything else I'm just going to blank out. And then I'm going to just write an H1 call, and I'm going to put blah, 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 blah. I'm going to put in the username by doing model.username. So reset username's password. Or actually, well, no, that'll work just fine. Then I'm going to write a form. So I'm going to say using HTML.begin form. And then I'm going to write a div class form row. And then inside of my div, I'm going to go ahead and put in a I'm going to go ahead and put a div class of input group. You guys will see where I'm going with this in a second. And then I'm going to do span class input group add-on. Inside of this, I'm going to put an I tag with a class of GLY ph icon and then glyph icons -lock. And then after the span, I'm going to put html.textbox4, f goes into f password. And then in my HTML attributes, I'm going to override the class. So I'm going to say class equals form control. Then I'm going to write another form row. Actually, I think previously in my other forms, I just wrote it in a p tag. Yeah, I just wrote it in a p tag. So I'm going to write a paragraph, and then I'm going to write a input type equals submit, value equals reset password, and then class equals button, button small, button default. Then I'll say or html.action link going back to, or I'll just say go back to index. The final thing I'm going to do is at the top of my form, I'm going to say html.validation summary. All right, let's go ahead and fire up our page. So I'm gonna hit F6 to recompile. The reason I need to recompile in this instance is that I added an additional action to my my website. Then we'll come back to the page, hit F5, and what we'll see is that. See, we got this cool little lock icon on the left-hand side, and that's the input group right there. We are having a slight margin disaster here, though. Why is that happening to me? Let's see here. All right, looks like the issue actually was I used form row instead of form group. Funny bit of history about that. I used to always, and I used to have a bit of CSS that I would take with me from project to project that's effectively been replaced by Bootstrap, or I would re-implement a certain amount of CSS for all the sites that I wrote. I always used form row to separate out row columns, not form group. Of course, with Bootstrap 3, it's form group. In addition, I'll also want to add in my labels. So I'll say html.label for fpassword. Anyway, come back here, hit refresh, and now we have a properly spaced out reset admin's password form with a go back button and a reset password button. And if I hit reset password, it'll of course tell us the password field is required. All right, all that's left on our reset password is to go back into our users controller and implement what happens when we post to it. So all that means is we need to load in the user. So user equals database users find ID. Check to see if the user is not null, or is null, sorry. If he is null, we redirect to action index. Otherwise, we'll simply say user set password form.password, or no, we don't want to do that quite yet. We'll want to make sure that the model state is valid, so that, because remember, this action will execute even if the model state is invalid. So even if they don't type in a password, it'll still execute this action. So I have to check manually for the model state. So I'll say if model state is not valid, return view form. This is actually going to introduce a very interesting bug that you might have actually already seen, because I see on my other monitor it's already there, but maybe you didn't notice. But let's finish out this method before we look at that bug that I just introduced. So then we'll say user set password form password, then we'll say user database save changes, which will persist the user to the database. Now I'll hit F6 to recompile my application. Remember, whenever we make changes to C#, we have to recompile. Whenever we make changes to the CS/HTML files, we don't need to recompile, but still, when in doubt, recompile. So we'll notice an interesting bug with this. If I hit reset password, look what happens. It says reset ''s's password. See, the name disappears. The reason the name disappears is that our username is being set on our view model, but not hydrated by your model binder. It's not being passed back from the view to the controller, meaning that the controller is this action right here is going to be responsible for rehydrating that property on our form. Because as of now, the form username field of this form that's passed into our post action is going to be empty because there was nothing provided to us by the browser to fill it with anything in the username. To fix that, I simply have to set form.username to user.username. I could have also fixed this by creating a hidden field on the form called username. But I typically prefer to do it this way. It just depends on the circumstances, I guess. Anyway, wait a year and a half, and then hit reset password, and it still says reset admin's password. So let's go ahead and make sure that it works. I'm just going to go into my users table from MySQL Workbench, and I'm going to look at my admin password, and my admin password looks like that, right? My hash. Let's come back here. Let's reset it to ASDF, which actually I kind of want to put in a password field instead of just a normal text field. Let's go back to our reset password CS/HTML and change this from a text box for to a password for. Come back here to our HTML, refresh, and we'll see it's now blinked out. All right, let's set the password to ASDF, hit reset password, and you'll notice we get the form back. That's because I didn't, at the end of my post action, I didn't redirect back to the index page. However, it should still have set the password. So if I come back into MySQL Workbench, let's just look at the end of this. The end of this is GZY. Let's refresh this query, and now the end of this is ALC. So the hash indeed did get updated with my new password. So that's good. My reset password page is functional, except doesn't have a very good user experience. So let's jump back into our user's controller, and instead of returning view form, which will just present the view back to the user, we'll return redirect to action index, which will redirect us to our user's index. So let's go ahead and refresh the page. Type in something else, hit reset password, and we've successfully reset his password. So now we can edit users, we can reset their passwords, but we can't delete them yet. Now, deleting, things like deleting and logging out become a little tricky. And the reason I say that is we want it to be a link or a button or a link that looks like a button, but we also want it to use the HTTP post action. We don't want it to use the get action. So effectively, we want a form that when the user clicks, posts to one of our actions, such as our delete user action or our log out action or something like that. The reason we do this is because semantically we really should be doing anything that does any sort of modification to anything, whether that be the state of whether or not you're logged in or deleting a user or really whatever, should be done with an HTTP post instead of an HTTP get. I mean, that's just a rule of thumb to follow. I don't want to make this a lecture about the different HTTP verbs, but that's something that we should do. So, well, we could also use the delete action as well, but I'm not going to get all resty on this. I just want to do this as straightforward as possible. So we're going to write a action result with an HTTP post attribute that deletes a user. We're actually going to write the action result first, then we'll write the button, and the button's going to not work, and I'll explain why it doesn't work, and then we're going to fix the button. So let's scroll all the way down and write our action. So our action is going to be require an HTTP post verb. We're going to say public AR delete int ID. Deleting is simply going to be var user equals database find, or sorry, database users find. Find, come on, ReSharper. There you go. ID. Then I'm going to say if user is null, then return redirect to action index. And that's not how you spell index. Then I'm going to say database users delete. Or sorry, database. It's remove, not delete. It's just the IntelliSense was taking 1.5 years to come up. So I'm going to say database users remove, and then I'm going to say database save changes. And I'm going to say return redirect to action. That's not how you spell index either. There we go. So this is our delete action. Very, very, very straightforward. However, we are going to need some work to be able to access this because of this HTTP post. And I'll explain why in a moment here. But first, we're going to go ahead and jump into our index page of our users and add our delete button. So our delete button is going to look like this. It's going to be a href url.action. Not surprisingly, we're going to go to the action called delete, and we're also going to pass in user.id into the parameters. And then I'm going to give it a class of button extra small, button, no, let's do button, it's danger, button danger. Will give us a nice red button. And then I'll give it a nice little icon, so GLYPH icon, and then what's the icon that I want to use again? Remove. I'm used to Font Awesome for icons because I used to use, well, Bootstrap 2, which didn't have font icons. So getting used to glyph icons is kind of annoying. Anyway, so let's go ahead and write in the word delete as well, so they know exactly what that button's going to do. Let's make sure we recompile the application and hit refresh. Wait, and wait, and wait. And now we have this fancy little delete button. Now if we go ahead and click this, we'll get a 404. Now you might be going, well, wait a sec. We have an action on our users controller called delete. He does take an ID. We are going to users delete with an ID, and we're getting a 404. That's because links result in HTTP GET actions. They don't result in HTTP POST actions. So a link will always result in getting. And we can check that by opening up our dev console and going to network, refreshing, and seeing indeed that the verb or the method that we used to access this resource was get and not post. Well, we're also lacking a confirm button. So when I hit delete, I want to confirm that the user or that the person who's working with this form really does intend to delete that user. So I don't want to make it easy to make mistakes. We're going to fix this with a little bit of JavaScript. What we're going to do is twofold. First of all, we're going to write code that'll allow us to mark any link as something that should result in a post operation against the server. And then we're also going to write another bit of JavaScript that will allow us to add a confirm dialog to our delete button. So basically, this JavaScript will be accessible from any bit of our application. So it's a nice bit of utility code that we can use throughout our project. So we haven't really talked about JavaScript a whole lot. Basically, what I'm about to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull in jQuery. And then I'm going to create a JavaScript bundle, and then I'm going to print that JavaScript bundle out in our layout, just like what we do with our styles. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's first head on over to jQuery. We'll want jQuery.com/download. Scroll down to jQuery 2x. We're going to want version 2. And we're going to grab the uncompressed development jQuery. Now this is going to result in us getting the script file loaded into our browser. And again, it's going to be uncompressed. We're going to be doing our own compression through the development or through the bundle support. So we don't really have to worry about getting a minified version. Instead, we'll just get a nice little development version. And I realize that I've been talking about jQuery, but I haven't really defined what exactly jQuery is. jQuery is a basic JavaScript framework, not basic. The reason basic came to mind is it's so ubiquitous these days. Most applications are written with jQuery, and most jQuery alternatives are effectively just lighter versions of jQuery. But we're going to be using this to speed up the development of those buttons. Again, I don't want to turn this into a web development or a big thing on web development other than what's necessary to work with our users and our roles and our other things. So what happens when you click on download jQuery 2x is you get the jQuery file loaded up into your browser. Just go ahead and hit Control S in your browser, and this will allow you to go ahead and save it out to any directory of your choice. I'm going to click on MMO class. I'm going to go into Buzz MMO, source, web. Now I'm going to create a new folder inside. So this is the root of my website. I'm going to create a new folder inside of this called scripts. Come up into here, and then I'm just going to save it as jQuery-210 or 210. Now flipping back over to Visual Studio, you'll notice that nothing has changed. That's because the scripts folder has not been added to our project yet, even though it lives on the file system. So to fix that, we have to click on Show All Files. We'll come over here to Scripts, right-click, and say Include in Project. So that'll bring jQuery into our project. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write another script file. I'm just going to create the file itself, and then configure the bundles, and then we'll worry about actually filling that file in. I just wanted to create the file first so that we have something to add to our bundles. So I'm going to right-click, add, I'm going to create a JavaScript file, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, how about forms? So now we have a forms.js file living in our scripts folder. But again, JavaScript is a front-end language, which means we need to load these JavaScript files up on our front end. The way we do that is going to be through our bundles. So let's jump over into app start bundle config, which is the file per convention that I have created to configure our bundles. And we're going to create a new script bundle. So I'm going to say var backend scripts equals new script bundle / we're going to run into a slight issue with this. And the issue is that the path of the bundle can't conflict with an existing file or existing folder in your project. So we can't put in scripts. So to fix that, I'm just going to say //js backend, because we don't have a folder named JS. Again, this is just going to be how it has to be, and really, you'll only ever be including your bundles once or twice in your application, so it doesn't really matter what we name them. So now to create backend scripts, I'm going to say backend scripts.include, and then I'm going to pass in a list of strings that represent the files that we want to include in this bundle. The first file is going to be squiggly /scripts jQuery-2.1.0.js. Again, the squiggly informs the file system that we want to reference the root of the project, and then it'll bring us into the scripts folder, and then it'll grab out jQuery. It's important that we load jQuery first, because our forms.js file is going to depend on functionality that was included with it. Next up, I'm going to pass in another string, which is going to be /scripts /forms.js. Finally, I'm going to say backend scripts dot transformers dot add new JS minify. And then I'll wrap everything up by saying bundles.add backend scripts. So I'm just creating a bundle. I'm referencing two files in my project. I'm adding the JS minify transform, which will result in our JavaScript being minified when we're in production mode. And then I added it to our bundles collection. which means that this bundle is now accessible from our layout file. So let's go ahead and copy this name so I don't forget it, and let's jump into Areas, Admin, Views, Shared Layout. We're jumping into the admin layout so that we can go ahead and print out our script bundle at the end of our body. So I'm going to say scripts.render, passing in JS backend. Now it's important that you put your scripts at the right before the closing of your body, and the reason is that scripts block. What does that mean? Well, that means that the browser isn't going to be able to do anything while it's loading a script. So it's important that we put our scripts at the end of all of our HTML and CSS so that by the time the browser gets to our scripts, it can load them without hanging the user interface or hanging the website for a little bit. Typically, when you go to a website and there's a big lag before you start to see content or certain things come in, it's because someone is running JavaScript before that markup was parsed by the browser, and the browser gets hung sitting there processing that script. So we want to make sure we put that at the end of our body. Okay, so now we have that. I'm going to hit F6. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into our admin just to verify that our script bundle is indeed being loaded correctly. Because I don't want to start writing code in our forms.js file before I make sure that the forms.js file is actually being included in our page. So I'm going to right click anywhere and hit View Page Source and scroll down to the bottom. And indeed we see our bundle being printed out. We see our jQuery 210 and our forms.js. Which our jQuery does load when we click on it, and our forms.js, which, although it's empty, still does load when we click on it. So now we can start adding code to our forms.js and be certain that it will be loaded into our browser. So what do I want to do in forms.js? Well, like I said, there's two things. I first want to make it so I can mark up a hyperlink tag with a post class that will indicate to this script that we want to post to that path as opposed to navigate to that path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say document.ready. Now I'm going to wrap all of this code in document.ready. jQuery object wrapped document.ready and then open function. Reason I'm doing this is I want to make sure that everything, including all the other scripts, have been loaded before this bit of code gets executed on the browser. Then I'm going to say for every a.post, so for every a tag or a hyperlink that has the post class, if they get clicked on, I want to do a variety of different things. The first thing I want to do is e.preventDefault. e.preventDefault comes from the parameter e that's passed into my event handler. And preventDefault will prevent the browser from navigating to wherever that a tag points to. We can actually see the behavior already. If I come into my areas, admin, views, users, and load up my index page, and then I add the post class to my a tag for my delete button, and then come back here and hit refresh, notice now I'm clicking delete and nothing's happening. Nothing's happening because these a tags have the post class added to them, and my script goes to every single a tag that has the post class and attaches a click handler that prevents the browser from doing anything when I hit that button. So it prevents the default behavior of the browser. And the default behavior of the browser when you click on an a tag is going to be to navigate to whatever page that a tag references with its href attribute. Okay, next thing is I'm going to alias out this. So money this. The reason I'm doing that is this object in this context is going to be the a button or the a tag element that was pressed. And I want to turn it into a jQuery object so I get access to more features. So I alias it out so I don't have to repeatedly do money this. And then my typical convention for jQuery objects is prefixing those identifiers with the $sign if they are a jQuery object. $ is valid in identifiers in JavaScript, by the way. Then I'm going to say var message, var message equals this data message. Then I'm going to say if message and not confirm message, then return. What does this do? Well, this just says if they have an attribute of data-message on the element, and we ask the user what that or whatever that message whatever text they put in for that message attribute, if we ask the user that question and they hit no, then simply exit. Just return. Return out of the click handler. Don't do anything else. If we neither have a message or the user accepted the message, then we want to do some magic. We want to create a form element. We want to set the method attribute to post. We want to set the action attribute to this attribute href, which will return the href that was attached to this particular a tag. Then we want to append it to document.body, and then we want to submit it. So we're instantiating a form behind the scenes, setting up a couple attributes on it, appending it to our document, and submitting it. And of course, since this form doesn't have any information inside of it, it won't actually be visible to the user. So they're going to be effectively creating an invisible form that will post and send the correct verb to our action. So let's go ahead and fill in our delete button with a message. So to do that, I'm going to go up to index, and I'm going to add a new attribute to my a tag, and I'm going to call it data-message. I'm going to say, are you sure you want to delete model, or sorry, not model, whoops, delete user.username. So this will add this confirmation message to this particular action. And again, this isn't built-in behavior. The whole post class and the data message attribute are being used only by this short script that allows us to use the proper HTTP verbs when interacting with data. All right, now let's go ahead and jump back in here and hit refresh and see if this works. Let's go ahead and delete bleh. I hit delete, and we get a confirmation dialog that says, are you sure you want to delete bleh? If I hit cancel, the message goes away. Let's say we want to delete him again, but we hit OK, and notice he just disappeared. Well, he disappeared because a lot of stuff just happened in the background. First of all, that form was created. The action, or the place that that form posts to, was set to the href of our a tag, which was set to the delete action of our user's controller. Then the form was submitted, which resulted in the browser making a post request all the way to our user's controller delete method. And then our delete method loaded up our user, checked to make sure he existed, removed him, saved those changes, and then redirected us back to the index before we could even blink an eye. Let's go ahead and I just want to show you guys this process as best as I can using the debugger. I'm going to place a breakpoint right here on my delete method, and then I'm going to hit F5 to open up my debugger, or to attach to that process, the website process. Then I'm going to come back here to my admin and refresh. Watch what happens when I go to nlock2 and hit delete. You see that we did indeed make an actual request to this this particular actions. The browser is actually going to a different URL and hitting this action, which is then invoked by our ASP.NET. And then you'll see that our user does get loaded in. He does get removed. Those changes get saved. And the last thing we do is we just return them back to where they were, which makes the process look like it's going really fast. I mean, it makes the process look instant, but in reality, we're actually loading up a separate page and getting a redirect. All right, so that pretty much wraps up our user's admin. We have our edit, which allows us to change our roles. We can reset our passwords, and we can delete users. So that's really all I want to do in this video. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and actually hook up our authentication so that only admins can get into the admin panel. And yeah, stuff and things. We'll see you guys in the next video.